We'll get started in just a few minutes. We're going to be doing Genesis chapter 37, I believe. Testing. Testing. All right. Okay, Genesis chapter 37. You guys ready to go? Welcome, everybody. We're going to be reading on Genesis chapter 37. We're also going to supplement with a little bit of our Creation and Blessings book by Alan P. Ross, Compliments of Alan P. We're going to go ahead and get right into it. Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings, in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bela and Zilpah. Welcome, everybody. Wait, we're in Genesis chapter 37. No, women don't have to be quiet. I'm not at church, I'm at home. I own this house. I can say what I want. But I will tell you, it's optional. Being here is optional. So, you pick. But no, I don't have to be quiet at my house. That was actually, if you want to actually talk about that particular chapter and verse, that was part of the epistles, which was a letter that was written to a church. And it's much like when you think about that letter, it's much like an email. Think of it as an email. So when we talk about emails are actually directed to a specific person, and so it's written to the intended recipient, and it's sent to an intended recipient. Normally, we don't do like a group email or blind copy all these people because the email is written and intended for a specific audience. That's exactly the way the epistles actually works as well. The epistles are the same way. These were letters written to a specific church. And in this case, the context of the scripture around women being quiet was that women in that particular specific church were out of order. They were being a bit loud and it was distracting. So they were asking questions at wrong times. And so the context was that the writer was saying, women, if you have questions, rather than be disruptive in the church, could you please just ask your husband and let's continue on with the church services? That was actually the context of it. Where the nuance is some people will take that epistle and they'll say, well, this is meaningful for all women in all seasons at all times. And some people will take that and they will say, this lesson is a lesson that transcends time. And so, although it's quote unquote an email or a written letter to a specific church, some people will say, I would like to take that and extrapolate it and say that it's meaningful and good for all people across all time, not just one church. Others will look at that same letter and say, no, this specific piece is meaningful only for this specific church for the nuance of women who are not being respectful within the church setting. So that's why we see some people who support women preachers and others who do not. That's why we see some people saying women should always be quiet and others saying they should not. What I will say is that there's still space for women to speak on gospel things. As it turns out, when Jesus returned, he returned, and the first person he appeared to were women. There were judges who were women, and women that had leadership in the Bible. So I say all that to say, I don't want to be your pastor anyway, so it doesn't really matter. People who are on my channel, they're here because they want to hear some of the Bible from me, and I've been adequately trained in a seminary school with a Master of Divinity. So for those who have ears to hear, they will listen and stay, and those who don't, you know, I would just say find an excellent man who is a great source of information so that you can be trained up in the word, you know. That's what I would say. And I support you if you think the context of that scripture says, if you feel like the scripture says that women shouldn't speak at all and have anything to say about the Bible, then I support you. Then just move on right along to another channel where there's men speaking about the word. Find the right channels, what I would say. But the people that are here are trusting that I'm giving a truthful word, and they're here for it. So let's see. Let me see what you guys said about that really quick before I go on. Yeah, so yeah, that's true. There is a book in the Bible that says women should not be allowed to have authority over a man, instead remain quiet. But then again, this is my YouTube channel and I didn't invite anyone. People showed up. So if you're a man and you showed up, you're welcome to stay. And if you don't like it, you're welcome to not stay as well. But do, 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 do. Let's see. Okay, that's cool. Women being quiet is not something you believe in. That's fine. I mean, some people really do. I get it. You know, once upon a time, I had a woman whose marriage needed some support, and she was coming to me for support. And I said, you know what? We really should be sitting here having this full conversation with your husband. Both of you guys need to be here having this conversation. And she actually replied that way. She's like, you know, my husband will not take guidance from a woman. And I respected it. And I was like, okay, well, please find yourself a man counselor to help you. What am I going to say? I mean, what am I going to say? If they aren't going to have ears to hear, it's not going to help them very much. Does that make sense? It's not going to help them very much. So better for them to find a person that they both can agree on so that they can give a word that's good for their relationship, that's right on time for their relationship. Does that make sense? Better to do that than to be doing something else. But you know, I get it. I mean, if there was more space for women to do more things in ministry, I would probably do more things in ministry. But to your point, there's not a lot of space for women to do a lot in ministry. So I do my YouTube and I talk about the Bible and then I go to sleep. So I don't really try to push my way in anybody's church and do anything in not anybody's church. I sit here on my YouTube station, which is my channel, and I read my Bible. So those who want to listen and those who don't want to listen, they can go listen to the Bible someplace else. That's how I look at it. So yeah, I mean, I'm not anybody's pastor, although I qualify to be. I'm not anybody's pastor, and nor do I want to be. I think the stuff that goes on that's required of pastors is a little, at times, it's just not practical. You know, people expect pastors to be perfect and have this and that, and at the end of the day, they're just people. They're people who love the Lord just like you and me, and we all need to have a relationship with God. So I don't want to sit around picking pastors apart. Most of them hardly make enough money to take care of their families, and they love God. That's the reality. Maybe they're not perfect, but most of them barely make enough income to pay their lights and their mortgage. So, and there are some that make plenty of money, but most of them just love God and they're doing their best. And to have all these crazy standards when their time is split in different ways and they're trying to read their Bible and study for their, create their sermon manuscript and go in front of the church is a lot. And then people are calling them all day, sick, needing weddings, needing funerals, needing support, needing a house visit, and then a bunch of women flirting with them, trying to do things that women sometimes want to do. So, I mean, there's a heavy burden for them. And so, yeah, I actually have a sweet spot. I control my whole entire day. I go live when I want. I read my Bible. I talk about it however I want. Some people love it. Some people hate it. Those who love it listen, and those who hate it scroll. And that's perfect for me. I don't have any major requirement. There's nobody breathing down my throat. I just get on the internet, love Jesus, and go to bed. It's very simple. But yeah, so I will do Ask Me Anything in a little while. I'm gonna go ahead and get into Genesis chapter 37. But that's a very good question, and I know a lot of people are actually thinking that, like, what is she doing talking about the Bible? Isn't she a female? Shouldn't she just stay quiet? The question is, what guys are out here talking about the Bible? Not enough of them, evidently. So we all do a little bit of our own parts here. Alrighty. So I wish I had my other phone that was. I really do wish I had my other phone that was my little light on there. And I don't even know where I put it. I think it might be upstairs. 1 second. I think I need my other phone because it's hard to see because it's kind of dark over here. I need my other light. Alrighty. Needed my light. But yeah, that's why we see in the epistles, that's why some people will take that word about women preaching and things like that. That's why some people will say, no, women should be quiet and not have much to say about gospel related church things. But because people interpret that verse differently, some people will say, women can preach, women can this, women can that. Others will say, no, they can't. It makes no difference to me. I'm just a little girl here with a YouTube channel. I'll let everybody fight amongst themselves about those things and I'll carry on. That's what I decided to do about it. Absolutely nothing. All right. Genesis chapter 37. And Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings, in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his sons, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a robe of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. Now Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Hear this dream that I've dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright, and behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." His brothers said to him, "Are you indeed to reign over us? Or are you indeed to rule over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, "Behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me." But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you?" And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in his mind. Now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." And he said to him, "Here I am." So he said to him, "Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring me word." He sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. And a man found him wandering in the fields, and the man asked him, "What are you seeking?" "I am seeking my brothers," he said. "Tell me, please, where they are pasturing the flock." And the man said, "They have gone away, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. They saw him afar, and before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams." But when Reuben heard it, he rescued him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life." And Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood. Throw him into the pit in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand to restore him to his father." So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe and the robe of many colors that he wore. And they took him and they threw him into a pit. And the pit was empty. There was no water in it. Then they sat down to eat. And looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, and their camels bearing gum, balm, and myrrh, and on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites. Let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers listened to him. Then Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. They took Joseph to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not in the pit, he tore his clothes and returned to his brothers and said, "The boy is gone, and where shall I go?" Then they took Joseph's robe and slaughtered a goat and dipped the robe in the blood. And they sent the robe of many colors and brought it to their father and said, "This we have found. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not." And he identified it and said, "It is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, "No, I shall not go to Sheol to my son. No, I shall not go down to Sheol to my son mourning." Thus his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. It's Genesis chapter 37, everybody. What a nice, lovely chapter. So let's now take a quick look at little information on creation and blessing by Alan P. Ross. If you're following along, we just finished reading Genesis chapter 37. We haven't gotten into all the details of it, but we're starting to get into some of the weeds here. So, welcome, welcome, everybody. The story of Joseph forms a unique literary unit in the book of Genesis. In many ways, this section displays a continuity with the preceding narratives about the patriarchs, but in many ways it differs. Biblical scholars have debated the form and the function of this section of the book for some time, and now there is a renewed interest in it as a piece of literature. Anyone familiar with the story of Joseph can identify its distinctive features rather easily. Within the unit, there are 3 sets of dreams that are symbolic, 4 sets of parallel relationships: Joseph and his family, Joseph in Potiphar's house, Joseph and the prisoners, Joseph and Pharaoh's household. 2 episodes in the pit or prison because of false accusation with clothing as the proof, repeated visits of Joseph's brothers to Egypt, and then the settlement of the family in Egypt. In addition to these motives, we have the figure of Joseph himself, righteous, wise, patient, and majestic. Even a casual reading of the story is sufficient to see that it is written differently than the patriarchal narratives. There are clear links, however, to the preceding patriarchal narratives. The story continues the theme of God's blessing in the births and prosperity in Egypt. The themes of good and evil come to a firm conclusion in the outworking of this story. The story also develops further the history of the patriarchal family, with its old animosities and its propensity to deceptive practices. Moreover, like the Jacob stories, the Joseph story is constructed around a journey out of the land, which was caused by deception within the family. But unlike Jacob, Joseph's return to the land is not reported in the story. Rather, the story ends with a preparation for the Exodus narrative. Joseph, like Jacob, endured a 20-year period of separation from the family, and it ended with the reconciliation with his brothers. They came to Egypt. However, he did not return home. Like Esau, the brothers of Joseph exhibited a profound change from their earlier hatred. As with the preceding narratives, the story of Joseph is an archetypical and it's didactic. It shows that just as Joseph lived in bondage in Egypt before his deliverance and supremacy over Egypt, so would the nation. Just as suffering and the bondage formed tests for Joseph to see if he had kept his faith and was worthy of the promise, so too the bondage of the nation was a means of discipline and preparation for the nation's future responsibilities. Moreover, the climax of the story showed that the Hebrew slave served a God who was infinitely superior to Egypt, who controlled the economy of Egypt, and whose wisdom outstripped the wisdom of Egypt. The emphasis on wisdom in the story led Gerard van Rad, Joseph narrative, Story of Joseph, to treat the material as wisdom literature. He argued that it portrayed the ideal state official, the wise ruler, and so might have been written in the time of Solomon. There are wisdom motives throughout the story, the Joseph story, which I'll analyze more closely unit by unit. Joseph was called a wise and discerning man in Genesis 41:33 and 39, and his life certainly displayed that characteristic. Van Rad drew several parallels to wisdom literature. Joseph feared the Lord more than people. He gave wise counsel. He avoided the adulterous woman. He was diligent in his preparation when there was plenty. He did not act out of revenge against his brothers. Other similarities between this section and the wisdom literature include the emphasis on the tension between the suffering of the righteous and the apparent prosperity of the wicked. The emphasis on the wisdom of a life of obedience to the Lord's instructions so that the life is productive. The indirect nature of revelation through symbolic dreams and mystery without direct theophany, showing people the Word of God through events. The emphasis on the Lord as the creator and sustainer of life, ordering the universe. the contrast between the righteous and the wicked, the envy and hatred of the righteous by the wicked, and the ultimate blessing of the righteous. The proposal that the Joseph material is wisdom literature has met with refining criticism. In general, scholars have concluded that Von Rad's use of the designation wisdom is too general for so many diverse materials. Crenshaw method, for example, argued against using wisdom as the broad category just because some similarities occur. The point is that several of these motives characterize other literature as well. But Von Rad was not consistent in his treatment of the material, which several scholars have pointed out. For example, Rupert commented that Joseph's ability to interpret dreams is a polemic against Egyptian wisdom, although Von Rad said that the wisdom literature is non theological. Von Rad overlooked the theological asseverations and the non wisdom themes. The major criticism of wisdom as the genre classification, however, is the very nature of the Joseph story. It is a story. It is a short story. Most modern writers follow Gunkel in classifying the material as a short story or novella. The story begins with Joseph as a boy and ends with his death. So there is an expected continuity. It has the development of plot through conflict with the brothers that works out in their reconciliation. The story flows with several individual scenes, each with its own exposition, climax, and conclusion. Coates explains that, in contrast to the patriarchal narratives, this section is not a series of independent tales. It uses the Joseph story as the central trunk and then hangs one independent account, the Judah Tamar story, and the two dependent but distinct stories, Jacob's death report and Joseph's death report, into its framework. There has been other suggestions for classifying this material: a story of divine guidance, or confrontation literature, or heroic literature. This third classification, proposed by Ryken, has some merit to it, but is not totally satisfying. Unlike classical heroes, Joseph does not risk everything to perform a heroic act. He functions as a faithful servant of God. It is God who moves through the events to bring deliverance. In this light, Joseph is very much like Daniel. Both men had the wisdom of God. Both interpreted the dreams of the king. Both were imprisoned for their obedience, and both were made rulers in the land. The similarities demand that the expositor investigate the two in order to determine the significance of the parallels. Similarities need not imply, though, that the accounts were written at the same time. The structure and motives fit the classification of a short story best, or as Westerman suggests, the family novel. The risk involved in so labeling it is that short stories are usually concerned with the individual and are identified as fiction. Westerman asserts that these distinguishing marks do not hold for the Joseph story. At least it is not fiction inasmuch as it tells of people who actually lived. Devoy also emphasizes this, nor is it restricted to the individual. Inasmuch as it does not deal with the experiences or fate of Joseph, though many think so, but of the family of Jacob, for which Joseph acquires a particular significance. If we think of a short story that is not a fictional piece about an individual who is at odds with society, then we may use the designation for the Joseph narratives. They certainly form a self-contained narrative, a unit that traces a complete story through to the resolution of its plot. The classification of the genre is important because it helps us to understand the literary design of the material. The form of the literature presents the ideas in a unique way, Knowing the features of the literary type helps the reader understand why things were said or not said in the development. Genesis 37 provides the introduction to the Joseph story in that it lays the foundation for the crisis between Joseph and his brothers and foreshadows through the dreams the final resolution to the crisis. The whole chapter can be divided into 3 scenes. The first, verses 2 through 11, the third, 31 through 35, taking place in the father's house, and the second, 12 through 30, taking place in the field. While it would be possible to treat the entire chapter in one exposition, including the choice of Joseph and then his rejection, there is sufficient material for 2 expositions. The first scene, the subject of this exposition, traces the growing estrangement between Joseph and his brothers, caused by the father's love and the Lord's choice of Joseph. The report of Joseph's dreams formed the divine call of Joseph, his choice by God to lead the nation. The immediate effect of this choice was hatred by his brothers. The expositor can readily see the paradigm in this scene of the story. When God chooses someone to lead, there may be envy and hatred in those who may feel more qualified to have that position of leadership. The chosen must give no one occasion to find fault. For those of you guys just joining in, we're in Genesis chapter 37, and I'm reading a supplemental text. I just finished reading the Bible on Genesis chapter 37, but now I'm reading supplemental text that further dissects Genesis chapter 37. And then when I finish with this, we'll have a little bit of conversation about it. The major theological idea is that the first scene is revelation through dreams. God confirmed through 2 dreams that Joseph would rule over his brothers. The expositor will have to study the significance of dreams in the ancient Near East, and especially in revelation from God. Here, it must be noted that the dreams of Joseph differ from the other dreams in God's revelation. Previously in Genesis, dreams included verbal communication, but now there were only symbols that needed interpretation. It appears that symbolic dreams were chosen because through them, the wisdom of Joseph could surpass the wisdom of Egypt. The unit also portrays human nature in response to the divine revelation. Jealousy welled up in his brothers over the choice of Joseph, a jealousy that later turned into a murderous hatred. Joseph seemed rather oblivious to it all. He simply served his father faithfully, bringing back an evil report about his brothers. Biblical teachings on faithfulness in the midst of envy and hatred find their beginnings here. After heading for the final section of Genesis, there are the generations of Jacob. The attention turns to Joseph. The first scene has 2 parts: Jacob's love for Joseph, 2b through 4, Joseph's dreams, verse 5 through 11, and the motive that ties these 2 parts together is the report of the brothers' hatred for Joseph, verse 4 through 5 and verse 8. The first part includes a narrative report of Joseph's faithfulness to his father, and then parenthetical information about Jacob's love for Joseph and his brother's hatred. The second part has 2 dream reports that are parallel in their construction: an introduction to the dream, a dream speech, a speech in response to that dream report, and a final narration of the consequences of the report. Both dream speeches use the particle hene, a typical form for reporting dreams. When Joseph faithfully brought back the bad report about his brothers, his father demonstrated his love for this son of his old age by giving him preferential treatment. But his brothers hated him. And when the Lord confirmed Joseph's selection for leadership through those 2 dreams, his father was perplexed. But his brothers hated him all the more. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, while tending the family flock with his brothers, brought back an evil report about their activity, for which he enjoyed preferential treatment from his father, but endured hatred from his brothers. While tending the family flock as a youth, Joseph had occasion to bring back a report of his brothers' evil activities. Israel loved Joseph and gave him preferential treatment, but his brothers hated him. Jacob loved Joseph more than the other Jacob loved Joseph more than the others and gave him a multicolored tunic. Joseph's brothers hated him because they were jealous of the favoritism shown by their father. Joseph reported two dreams that symbolically revealed he would rise to prominence over his family, causing his father to rebuke him and his brothers to hate him all the more. First dream, Joseph reported having a dream that symbolically using sheaves foretold his rise to prominence. Joseph's dream introduction. Joseph dreamed a dream and told his brothers. Dream speech. Joseph explained the dream to his brothers. Response. His brothers asked him if he would rule over them. Consequences. His brothers hated him more. Second dream. Joseph reported another dream that reiterated symbolically, using sun, moon, and stars, that he would rise to prominence over his family. Introduction. Joseph dreamed again and told his brothers. Dream speech. Joseph explained the dream to his brothers. Response. His father rebuked him. Consequence. His brothers envied him, but his father pondered it. Those who are faithful in their service will find favor from their master, but hatred from individuals who are unfaithful. The beginning of the story portrays Joseph as a faithful son among unfaithful sons. While keeping his father's flocks with some of the brethren, Joseph had occasion to bring back an evil report. This information requires careful examination. Grammatically, the suffix am must mean that the report was about the brothers, and the adjective evil, one of the important themes in Genesis, modifies this report. He brought back a report of their evil deeds. This verse provides the first glimpse of the evil activity of Joseph's brothers. Before the story gets very far, their evil will be turned on him. A report such as Joseph gave about his brothers' activities, whatever they were, has never been considered the popular thing to do. It opens up the one who gives it to charges of being a tattletale from those who would take evil lightly. In fact, the incident shows that Joseph was faithful to his father. Those who would be leaders must prove faithful in the smaller responsibilities. The story holds up that this trait of Joseph as exemplary. In a parenthetical clause, not unrelated to Joseph's acts of faithfulness, the text explains that Jacob loved Joseph more than all his children because he was a son of his old age. That he was Rachel's son, and that he was a faithful to Jacob, as verse 2 indicated, greatly enhanced his love. So that he was Rachel's son and that he was faithful to Jacob, as verse 2 indicated, greatly enhanced his love. But we cannot ignore the parallel between this report in 37:3 and the one in 25:28. At the beginning of the Toledot of Isaac, we learned of the father's greater love for one of the sons, and of the subsequent flight of Jacob. And at the beginning of the Toledot, Jacob, we discovered the father's greater love for one of the sons, and the subsequent envy and hatred that led to deception and the disappearance of Joseph. The love of the father was expressed in this episode by Jacob's giving his son a distinctive tunic. The traditional idea of a coat of many colors may not be what this text means. It probably describes a sleeved coat that reached to the wrists and ankles, the apparel of a princess in 2 Sam 13:18. Far more than being a nice gift, this tunic set Joseph apart from the brothers as the favored one, probably indicating that he would receive the inheritance, the leadership, and the double portion. Joseph was Rachel's son, after all, the son of the wife that Jacob had chosen before being deceived by Laban, and the son of his old age. But Jacob should have remembered from his own childhood, as well as from the early marriage days, what a display of favoritism would do to a family. It had separated him from his mother, and it would separate Joseph from him. He probably could not avoid feelings of favoritism, especially in a family like this one. But to display those feelings in this way was naive. Predictably, the brothers hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. The reader must appreciate the narrator's understanding of human nature. They hated Joseph, not his father. Those who were envious often turned their hatred on the one favored, not on the one who showed favoritism. Likewise, in the Cain and Abel story, Cain attacked Abel, not God. To capture the significance of the animosity, a study of the verbs to love, Ahab, and to hate, Cain, is essential. They describe active emotions, choosing and rejecting, responding favorably to, and acting in hostility against. Bush analyzed the relations as follows. They hated him. This result showed that Jacob acted unwisely in distinguishing Joseph from his brethren by this mark of his regard. It seemed to be palpable, invidious, and premature, taking away of the birthright from Reuben and giving it to the firstborn of his beloved wife. The birthright was indeed to be Joseph's, and it was due to him as the eldest son of Rachel, when the firstborn son of Leah had forfeited it. But as might have been expected, Joseph was at once exposed to the envy of his brethren by the mark of his father's fondness. And the effects of that envy cost the good old man many years of pungent affliction. The hostility in the brothers' hatred is amplified by the notice that they could not speak peaceably to him. Here was the first noticeable disruption of the peaceful existence the family now enjoyed. Probably they could not now even greet their brother in a civil fashion. Verse 19 and 20 of this chapter record the bitterness they exuded when they merely spoke about their brother. Immediately, the story opens a rift between Joseph and his brothers. They were evil, and he was faithful. He was favored, and they were not. Their intense hatred soon found expression in destructive action. The Lord will use the one who is faithful in little things to have authority over greater responsibilities. 5 through 11. The second part of the passage poses a greater difficulty for the expositor because the ideas in the text must be transferred to an applicable level. It simply will not work to remain on the literal level of the story and make some observations about God's revelation in dreams. In wording the point from these verses, I have thus concentrated on the meaning of the revelation rather than the method. Through these dreams confirmed Jacob's choice of his faithful son to be the leader. In a dream, with both symbolism and verbal communication, the Lord had informed Abraham of the sojourn in Egypt. In a dream, the Lord had promised Jacob protection and prosperity with Laban in Padan Aram. In a dream, God spoke to Laban and kept him from harming Jacob. So here too, God uses dreams to predict rule of Joseph over his family. In all these passages, the recipients were either Israelites or about to sojourn in Gentile lands or non-Israelites themselves. Dreams apparently were highly regarded as of divine origin in the ancient world. Here, the dreams were symbolic. They both carried the same message. The first introduced the important revelation, the second merely reiterated it. Joseph, in his boyish naivete, reported the dreams to his family, and they fully understood their import, reacted as might be expected under the circumstances. The first dream had an agricultural symbolism, possibly anticipating the manner by which Joseph would come to power in Egypt. The second dream involved celestial images, the sun, moon, stars being easily recognized for their significance for rulership. These dreams symbolically represented the exaltation of Joseph over his whole family, who incidentally would also have positions of authority, as a symbol of stars signified. But they missed out. They missed that point when they saw only the supremacy of Joseph. The key idea in the dream is that the explanation that their symbols bowed down to his, showing an act of submission and obeisance, which says they bowed themselves to him to the earth. In response to these dreams, reports the brothers hated all the more, verse 5 and 8, and envied him, verse 11, questioning his audacity to suggest that he would actually rule over them. The interpretation of the dreams was correct, and their scoffing was forcefully displayed. Will you indeed rule over us? Or better, you don't mean to tell us that you will rule over us, do you? The infinitive absolute in the question heightens the doubt. The construction is then repeated, but with a different verb, or will you indeed have dominion over us? The particle, I'm here, being the interrogative particle. They understood perfectly. A younger brother would rule over the rest. And the question of who should rule, especially among the brothers or equals, is a troubling matter at any time, but frequently so in ancient Israel, and then the subsequent struggles for rulership in the monarchy. This choice of Joseph marked a change from the normal society order, but did not differ from previous narratives in which the younger son was made lord over the older brother. Jacob's response to the dream was more tempered. At first, he reacted strongly, rebuking his son. But then he observed and saying, surely Jacob must have been, saying, surely Jacob must have seen the repetition of his own beginnings in the beginnings of Joseph's career. Surely he knew for a fact that God would select the younger over the older and could declare his choice in advance, whether by an oracle or by a dream. The story of Joseph begins by unfolding the grand theme. Joseph would be elevated to rule over his brothers, and the major tension his brothers' growing hatred of him. The reaction of envy and hatred is understandable. However, yet, placed in contrast to Joseph's faithfulness and honesty, demonstrates why they were not chosen. The first scene of the Joseph story then relates how God's sovereignly selected his future leader and how that choice brought out the envy of those who would have to submit. Rather than recognize God's apparent choice through their father and through the divine revelation, the brothers set themselves a course in which they would eventually try to destroy him. There is no place in leadership for the uncontrollable hatred and envy that leaders often face with opposition. The lesson is timeless. God will choose faithful, righteous people for a position of leadership, in spite of the jealousy of others. This statement could be turned the other way as well. Those whom God chooses for positions of leadership may encounter jealous hatred from others. The one who would be a leader must be faithful in discharging the duties at hand. No matter what hatred his faithfulness brings, God and those who are spiritually mature will honor it. And those who are called to submit to others, even though they may feel more qualified to lead, must not let their jealousy turn into cruel hatred. Even in Christianity, the call to submit to others is not popular teaching. So that is kind of the first 12 verses of Genesis chapter 37. I think I'll save the second part of it for later. So we can see in Genesis chapter 37, we're able to see that Joseph was speaking about the fact that he had dreams. He was communicating those dreams to his brothers, to his father, and there was a lot of hatred and animosity being built towards him. And so I think the first thing that we can take from this Genesis chapter 37, actually, before I do this, I'm going to log back in to do the reading separate from the study. So I'm going to hang up and I'm going to come back in to do the Bible study on a separate link. So talk to you soon.